Hi, so my name is Bill Buchanan, and I lead World Leaders in Cybersecurity podcast. Today I have Don Smith with me. Hi, Don.
Hi, Bill. Nice to see you again.
Thank you. Don leads the CTU Threat Research Group at SecureWorks. His career started with the creation of DNS in 2005, and which was acquired by SecureWorks in 2009. He has extensive knowledge of cybersecurity and is seen as world leader in the field. Don also is the industry co-chair for the Strategic Cyber Industry Group at the National Crime Unit at the UK National Crime Agency and a member of the UK National Cyber Advisory Board. He is also the co-chair of the Cyber League at the NCSC. So I know you've had quite a past in the industry, and I've seen your career evolve, and we've been very lucky to have you speaking inspirationally. I think you're one of the best speakers in cybersecurity I've ever come across. Gets a little close to the bone sometimes, but you come away from your
Interesting.
presentations always learning something, and that's really great. I think in this world of corporate presentations, it was so refreshing to really see you giving your heart and soul to the audience. So, can you tell us a little bit about your past and how you got into cybersecurity?
Well, yeah, the getting into cybersecurity story, I guess, is it's a prophecy for the future in many ways. I was working at Heriot Watt after graduation. I had no funding, and some lecturers that had thought a lot of me when I was an undergraduate basically created a job for me to run the postgraduate computing systems at the Maths and Actuarial Maths department at Heriot Watt. And that was a reasonably large sum network, and about 2 weeks in, we got a phone call saying that someone was logging in as UID equals 0 into our system. So my first hack that I dealt with was back in 1993, and that sparked an interest in security that stayed with me through the VVL, VLSI Vision Group days, which was an Edinburgh University startup. And then, that took me to Geneva with ST Micro, where I ran operational security. And then when I came back from Geneva, I joined DNS, which is where I first met you because you had a good relationship with Graham Cox.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
And so that, yeah, yeah,
and then I guess since then, obviously, when I joined DNS, one of the things that we'd done at ST was have everything tied to an identity. Back in those days, there were a lot of large enterprises with big LDAP servers. We had found a neat trick, whereas if we could identify who consumed the service, we could recharge it. So every single one of our central services and email, web access, everything, we handled closely with identity provisioning and tracking systems. So I think Graham hired me when he saw that experience in identity management, because at the time DNS had just landed the contract to do the security and identity aspects of GLOW, the Scottish Schools Digital Network. So back in 2005 when I joined DNS, identity was the thing, and we worked very closely with Microsoft on ADF SV2, might even be called Geneva or Zurich or something. And yes, at the time that SecureWorks bought us, we were saying identity is the new perimeter and all that good stuff, which of course it now is, and it was back then. But yes, that was the start. And obviously at the time of the SecureWorks acquisition, I moved, I guess, from someone whose career had been focused on controls to someone's career that was focused on the threat. And that's when we first started to work on very interesting incident response engagements with hostile state actors, be they Chinese, Iranian, Russian, North Korean. And I guess that's been my life since about 2012, has been focusing on making sure that SecureWorks had the best understanding of the threat. And of course, for anyone watching this who's slightly confused, that I've got a SecureWorks top on, you might see the blue here, that's a Sophos t-shirt.
yeah, yeah.
So Sophos bought SecureWorks on February 3rd, 2025. My team, the research team, Counter Threat Unit, has come into the XOps organization within Sophos, and will continue to do the same job, which is to make sure that the organization we support has the best understanding of the threat. to protect our customers, and to inform our product development. So so far so good. Obviously, it's early days for acquisition integration, but those of us that are engaged are really enjoying it. And obviously, the aperture and reach that we get with all of the data that an organization the size of Sophos captures from their endpoint agents and their other products. Some of my team are rubbing their hands in glee in terms of the way that we're going to be able to develop our understanding of the threat with all of that new aperture.
Yeah, that's great. So I know there are things that are quite sensitive and you can't actually say, but what does a typical day involve for you? What's a lead threat analyst for a big company like Sophos? What do they do?
Yeah, so it's funny. I've answered this a few times for students in presentations at Napier, and I was going to say it's surprisingly boring, but it's also surprisingly not boring. If you're a single researcher, you are picking up breadcrumbs and you are looking at data sets and you're joining the dots and you're handling one thing that you're absolutely focused on. And you may be limited in your ability to focus on that because you maybe don't have the aperture of the data sets and things like that. But you also have the benefit of only focusing on that one thing. If you work for an organization that's doing well over 1,000 incident response engagements a year, and incident response engagements are gold because it's first-hand observation of the act of tradecraft. And in the case of SecureWorks, as an example, we had 40 petabytes of client telemetry that we could search across. And with Sophos, the data sets are even larger. A big part of my job is making sure that we have the systems that allow us to orchestrate access to that data, to query it in a sensible fashion. I often say it's like wandering along the side of a riverbank with a fishing rod and kind of working out like where are the good pools and eddies where it's a good place to drop your fishing rod in to mine for data, because there's so much data you could get lost. So half of my entire team, and this is similar for other large research organizations, like Mystic and Microsoft and others. Half of my team is working on data orchestration, on systems that permit data to be queried, sense to be made of data, links to be drawn between data sets. So there's a huge amount of this, which is big data. And then the other half of the team is, I was going to say more to artisanal, but you need to be pretty artisanal with understanding these data sets in the first place. And that's the research team. So I think, Bill, you know both Chris Yule and Rafe Pilling that work for me. So Chris runs the collection and capability side of my organization, and Rafe runs the research side. And obviously, the research side, the output from that is what you see when we're quoted in the press or we put blogs out or and things like that. So, and a typical day will be understanding where we are with some of the big evolution projects and micro evolution projects. And then, sometimes you take some time to yourself, as I did last week, and you pick up some privileged source reporting from a government agency and you look across client telemetry and you find something interesting, and then you realize that some bad guys have been TFTPing the wrong router configs to a customer's router, and that's a really interesting customer, and I can't say which one it is for obvious reasons. So yeah, so I wouldn't say it's every day, but certainly a couple of times a week, you trip over something super interesting and you say to yourself, I'm going to stop all this project program management stuff and I'm going to dig into disrupting the bad guys for a wee while. So, that's what keeps you going, I suppose.
Yeah, so it looks like you took the right route, not into academia, but into industry. I think
I think so, yes.
you certainly would have been so much constrained and not get access to all that data that you have. So what do you think is the greatest cybersecurity threat at the current time? And I appreciate there are probably many things. What would be your top shopping list of threats at the current time?
Well, there's threats. And then, because obviously, threat is a combination of intent, capability, and the opportunity. And we are in a chaotic world today where there's been some significant disruption to the large players in the e-crime ecosystem. So Opchronos, the lockbit takedown, is an example of that. And we can see extreme flux and entropy in the way that the crime actors are going about their business. You can see that there's a blog we put out a couple of weeks ago on Anubis and Dragonforce and two different models that they were using for selling their services to other criminals. So that's a risk, but that's more that's like background radiation risk thing, So and there's a tweet I quote a lot. In InfoSec, there's an awful lot of turbulence with very little flow. Go away for a week, you think it's all changed. Go away for a year, and it's all the same. So we've got that. We've got a period of geopolitical instability, quite clearly. Some of it is things that we would never have predicted. Others are things like Ukraine, China, Taiwan tensions, and all the rest of that. That obviously makes things interesting. However, if I had to pick one thing, it's our industry's focus on technical controls and the fact that what is much, much harder always is to build systems and processes that allow people to be secure. And I worry when I think about the fact in 1993, my first cybersecurity incident was an unpatched internet-facing machine. Well, internet-facing is a euphemism because back then Janet was X25, but that's a detail. And yet, one of the very, very largest initial infection vectors we see consistently across incident response engagements is unpatched internet-facing stuff. And the news always talks about the 0 days, but it's not 0 days, it's N days. And in order to have things patched with alacrity, we need general education across anyone who has a role to play in IT or information systems, not just the security people. I think security people know that we need to patch our stuff quickly. I think everyone in an enterprise needs to understand the role they play in securing the digital perimeter of that enterprise. And I think that's the thing that worries me. What worries me is the lack of general education. And that also worries me from a whole digital citizen perspective as well. Obviously, if the bad guys can, they will stratify their targeting, and the fraudsters will target the elderly. And if they can, they'll target the elderly and affluent. But everyone is constantly at risk online. And I just don't think there's the right general level of awareness education going on in schools from the earliest age to make sure that as young digital citizens move into the workplace, they understand that the security people are not just being a pain in the ass when they're asking you to fully implement multi-factor auth. Yes, I meant that also for the admin accounts. Yes, I also meant that for your third parties in your supply chain. So I think my biggest worry is just that it's not a lack of cybersecurity specialists, although you probably don't want me to say that, given your training as cybersecurity specialists. It's more a lack of cybersecurity generalists across the workforce. And if I'm allowed a small appendix, the COM scattered spider, this has been recorded just at the start of May 2025. So we are in the immediate aftermath of the M&S and co-op stuff. That's a worrying trend. Bill, you will definitely remember LulzSec and the few months where LulzSec did their stuff back in 2012. And that was just a small group of talented young men who just decided that they could hack anyone they liked with impunity. And that's pretty much the scattered spider group. And this is what I think some of us at least have been worried for a while. If you put a red team against a large enterprise, they'll generally succeed. And that tells me that the only reason why we don't have more hacks is that we don't have more hackers. So, I think anyone who's sitting there thinking that our networks are well defended is having a laugh.
Yeah. And the target tends to be, or the end point is ransomware and data exfiltration. So they've got you twice. So it looks like, yeah. So as you said,
that's just you look at the evolution from banking Trojans to single host ransomware to multi computer ransomware and data exfiltration for ransom. This is This is just the evolution of bad guys working out how to maximize the return on investment of a compromised host.
Mm. So I once seen some research that actually said that technology companies were actually fairly well defended in banks, especially because banks have been running security operation centers for
Yeah.
10, 20 years or so. The soft targets tended to be healthcare and government. Education is another one, of course.
Healthcare, government, education, and manufacturing. And
Manufacturing. Yeah.
there's you know, so the banks have a special advantage because clearly security is in their DNA from a physical sense going back many, many years. However, they have another advantage, which is that they are in a heavily regulated industry from a cyber compliance perspective. So, you know, if you get a group of bank CISOs together, they will complain. Well, they won't complain, but they will talk lovingly of the monetary authority in Singapore, who tends to be the first one that comes out with, you know, slightly testing challenges in the compliance regimes. So you have an incentive there because if the banks aren't compliant, they can't trade. And so it's critically important for them to continue investment in that. Plus, they have the advantage, as I say, of it being in their DNA. And you don't see, as a rule, large banks getting hit by stuff like this, ransomware. Whereas if we take manufacturing because there's a lot of emotion around education and healthcare, but if we take manufacturing, which is the vertical that we see most malicious activity in, and you could say, well, has it been targeted? And it's not. If you're in manufacturing, you've got a commitment to your staff so that people don't get hurt when you're making things. You've got a commitment to your customer that the products that you make won't hurt them. Then you've got a commitment to the customer that the product is fit for purpose. So you've got all of this focus on, you know, if you ever go to a building site, you know, you will see the sign, how many days since the last health and safety incident. If you visit an oil and gas company or a electricity generation company and you're on the stairs and you don't have your hand on the handrail as you're going down the stairs, you'll get a ticking off from the person. There's a real focus on physical health and safety. And there are many less, there's no real compliance regimes in general, I think, that these people are going to be forced to stop trading if they're not compliant from a cybersecurity perspective. So there is naturally it's a hard job for a CISO in a manufacturing environment to fight for money against other asks within an enterprise. So a lack of investment, it's certainly not a lack of focus or knowledge or understanding. I think it's purely a lack of investment driven by kind of compliance and company culture is, I think, what leads to the fact that you have more vulnerable devices, more supply chain issues, less full deployments of MFA. And these things are, you know, the three primary ways into organizations. So verticals are never really targeted unless it's by hostile state actors. It's more that some verticals don't have a crunchy gravel drive and don't have a CCTV system and don't have a large barking dog. So they sort of make themselves available. They present the opportunity to the bad guy and allows them to be opportunistic.
Yeah. And obviously retailers have been targeted in the UK just now, as you said, Marks and Spencer's and the Co-op and
Yeah.
others. Are they soft targets, and how could they better defend themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know is the honest answer. We certainly have retailers who are customers. Neither of those are. And their CISOs know what they're talking about and have the right investments. I think you know, you could ask yourself if there's a focus on PCI compliance, on payment card compliance, and quite rightly, obviously, because payment card fraud, you know, not a nice thing. What does the security control framework look like inside an organization where having a tick in the box for PCI is critical, but maybe enterprise security isn't. And that what we're not dealing with here, and obviously it's guesswork because nobody really knows what's going on, and it's all layered reporting and rumor and everything else. But it sounds like an enterprise breach rather than a credit card breach. So you just have to ask yourself what compliance targets have people had to come up with there, and does that make these retailers a soft underbelly? And there are other things about retailers where, without segmentation, you have obviously a massively distributed system, and that was demonstrated by the TJ Maxx folk, who's Albert Gonzalez way back, where from memory I think they were hacking the Wi-Fi in stores and then just traversing the networks. So I think they have a challenge possibly in terms of prioritization, which then may leave a door open. I have to say though, in these incidents, if the adversary is the one that people are saying it is, they're particularly adept at social engineering, which is another separate set of challenges. So,
yeah. And it's unbelievable that ransomware's been around. I actually interviewed the person who first wrote the first research paper on ransomware, and it's unbelievable that we still are in a state in the industry that we can't actually stop it. And obviously, data exfiltration is extremely difficult because how do you tell the bad traffic from the good traffic, especially if the data is tunneled? So, what's your insights on better protecting against ransomware and data exfiltration? You could write a book on it, I know.
you could, but it's super simple, and I've said it already multiple times in our conversation. The first thing is, if you can do nothing more, patch the stuff that faces the internet, and if you can't patch it, put in some compensating controls. So, as an example, back in the day at ST, when I was out in Geneva, we had some ropey old Oracle J2EE app that was handling some part of our extranet, which we had no control over the version of Apache that was embedded into this Oracle web server. And we knew that their patch cycle was about 6 months behind the rest of the world. So what did we do? Initially, we just put our own Apache as a reverse proxy in front of it, and then shortly afterwards replaced it with a very, very early version of a WAF, a web application firewall, and this is back in 2003. So yeah, anyway, patch stuff that faces the internet, fully implement multi-factor auth, and have a key focus on your provisioning flows and what happens if someone has been created as a user and they haven't done the initial enrollment. For means of efficiency, that tends to be an asynchronous task where the enrollment can be done by the person after it's been set up. And it is, I won't go as far as to say it's common, but it is far from rare to find that threat actors have got into an organization by identifying users that have not yet been enrolled in multi-factor auth and doing the enrollment for them. And obviously, we've seen that in terms of fraud with banking for people who've previously not been set up for internet banking, who then get set up with a bad guy middling that. So patch your stuff, fully implement multi-factor auth, and then if you have bought some security controls, look at the output from them, because it is rare, if not non-existent, that we come into an incident and look at it and say, you had no chance of spotting this. It's obviously very easy to say that with hindsight, but and there's an entirely different challenge there with the volume of alerts that various security systems throw up. But yeah, really simple. Patch your stuff, fully implement multi-factor auth, and look at the output from whatever monitoring you have in place, so that if the initial infection isn't caught, you're at least catching some of the traversal. And then there's an entirely separate thread here, which is on business continuity and disaster recovery. Even if you were to pay a ransom, it's an enormous IT task, and we've seen customers who have paid the ransom, and it'd be a 6-9 month job to recover tens of thousands of systems. I don't know if backups have become unfashionable, Or I really don't understand why this pressure appears to be there. Understanding your core data, making sure it's backed up, and making sure it is not somewhere where it can be got at is absolutely something that IT professionals have understood for years. When I worked at VDL Vision Group, the camera spin-off from Edinburgh University, I was the IT manager there, and I was doing, nightly level sevens, weekly level threes, and monthly level zero backups in a Unix sense. And the monthlies went in my back pocket and went home. So if fire hit the place, we had every monthly backup, full level zero backup, going back over time. In fact, I found a box of EXO 8mm exabyte tapes in my garage the other day. I could still rebuild the VVL network from circa 1998 if I could find an exabyte tape drive and a Sun workstation to restore it from. But I just don't know what's gone on, if it's just the complexity of SaaS services, the fact that no enterprise is an island. But it always shocks me that when you hear people saying we have no choice but to pay, and you're like, really? Like, really? What happened to your backups?
Yeah. I mean, there must be a metric there. I think there should be an audit compliance metric. How long will it take you if your whole system crashed to rebuild the whole thing from scratch? And how long would it take to build your whole organization greenfield on another place? It shocks me that that still isn't a thing where you can actually say to people, how long will it take you if all the systems went down and all the data was crashed? How long? Tell me, 6 hours, 12 hours, and so on. So it really is shocking in retail, which is obviously needs the constant input of data and keep the system going, that doesn't actually happen. So
That's
obviously we're
right.
seeing the rise of Gen AI. You've seen AI for decades. It's been around. It was an academic thing that never really went anywhere. And then 2017, Google published this Transformers paper that really changed the world of
Yeah,
AI with LLMs and so on. So obviously, it can play a key part in the defense of an organization. So purely from a defensive point of view, do you see the rise of AI in within companies?
I do. I do. I think I mean, I think people sometimes forget that these generative AI models are like super complicated Markov processes where, the generation of the next world is based upon the state of the previous thing and the state of a similar sort of massively complicated model that's out there. What's the more probabilistically most likely next word? And I think obviously they're getting much better. If you go in thinking that what you're dealing with is some kind of database that you can mine for data, um, then on the edges, you're going to end up with hallucinations from the AI system. If you go in with a mindset that this is the best translator of the world, it's like a Babelfish that will take something of one form and turn it into something of a different form. We've had huge success with that. Things like, please explain what this piece of PowerShell does, and encoding that into our software so that customers, when they're looking at the things our SOC is sending over, we can have AI explainers where it's translating, a bit of code, for want of a better word, into some human readable summarized content. Similarly, I was looking at our costs for translating our written threat intelligence into Japanese, and I thought this is a lot of money. I asked the team if we could translate using OpenAI, and we did some tests. We plumbed it into our publication pipeline. We sent the samples over to our Japanese team for them to check, and they came back and said, these translations are better than the company that you were working with to get human translations. So anytime there's a translation or a transformation of whether it be from code or from language to language, we're seeing great success with AI. And then in the middle ground there's what I will call, and will continue to call, machine learning. So SecureWorks has patents out for a thing called 4C from 2013, 2014, where we basically were using AI not to identify badness, but based upon previous decisions the Security Operations Center had taken, it would rule out false positives. And our ML framework was dealing with 46% of every alert that we dealt with.
Mhm.
And I know I'm not familiar with them yet. I know Sophos has similar ML type systems. So these, I guess, are things that help preserve margin and make our services cost effective rather than banner waving stuff. But still, machine learning, as opposed to generative AI, has a huge role to play in terms of making security operations efficient.
Yeah. Uh, and obviously, they're very good at that first line defense, the level one SOC analyst that you would get. But really,
Yeah.
when it comes to reasoning and things, they're not quite there. And I've seen research that maps to the MITRE framework quite well. So they're giving the analyst some heads up on this could possibly be this, and here are
Yes.
the possible mitigations. But it's still the human that's making the decision there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and obviously, so that's the defense side. But isn't there a worry now that these advanced machine learning models are in the hands of almost novices or every single person? If you look at Llama 3, is it 70 billion parameters that it's trained on? Is there now a worry that the threat landscape is going to completely change now that every adversary in the world now has these advanced tools and they don't have to have that deep, as you said earlier, that deep knowledge and experience of creating tools and using them. Is it going to change the threat landscape, do you think, or is it changing it?
Yeah, I think it has changed it a little bit. I think it will change it. Is it a worry? Yes. Is it my biggest worry? No. So if you were to, so I back in the day when Emotet was a big botnet, we would emulate it and we would request new payloads for new spam runs from Emotet so we could see what was the spam that the bad guys were sending out. And Emotet had a module that would steal email from inboxes and then weaponize it and re-inject it. And often it would just take a thread and kind of, in inverted commas, reply to it and say, please click here. Nothing, no context, still hugely successful. Now, obviously, if that was running now, they could ask AI to create a, plausible couple of paragraphs to add to the conversation with a please click here. But if they're already getting more clicks than they can chew through, then why would they bother with the complexity of adding that into their system? Which kind of brings me to where the real worry is for me. Um, every enterprise now should be using AI in one form or other for their back office efficiency. And, like I say, it could be micro cases like a couple of the ones I've outlined. But if you aren't asking that question, your competitors probably are, and you're going to be inefficient. So if we look at some of the larger e-crime groups, and ask ourselves, what happens if they suddenly become 50% more efficient because their back office functions become 50% more efficient? Are they able to then capitalize and do twice as many ransomware engagements? And in order for this to make sense, I've touched on it earlier, my belief is that the gate in the system isn't the number of compromised networks out there or that access brokers have got access to. It's the number of hands on keyboard that the bad guys have to actually execute against it. So if you can make those bad guys more efficient, then that's going to move the needle. So there's that aspect, and then there's also the stolen data is never monetized, despite what law enforcement say. I don't think we've seen a single case where someone has attempted to monetize, because that's hard. They have to sift through it, they have to find the gold, they have to then engage, and it's more profitable for them to just abandon it and move on and ransomware somebody else. But what happens if they can use AI to go through the data they've stolen from organizations and attempt to find different ways to monetize it, find interesting data in there, find embarrassing data in there, set little worker bots off to do that sort of thing. So I think my worry is twofold. So I'm not anticipating an advanced attack that we can never deal with. I'm not actually too worried about it enabling people who would not normally have gone into the industry, say, or didn't have the technical talent. I'm more worried about the people that are already making money, are already ruthless and efficient, either finding a new route to monetization of data they already have, or becoming much more efficient. And just to add to that, if you go to the National Crime Agency stuff on OpChronos, you'll see that of the 200 or so Lockbit affiliates, and to become a Lockbit affiliate, you had to pay a Bitcoin, so which is not an inconsiderable sum of money. So I think the statistics will not be precisely this, but they'll be roughly like this. Of the 200, less than 100 actually ever ransomware anyone. So maybe 100 of them are law enforcement, who knows? And of that 100, there are varying degrees of success. A lot of people negotiated and got no payout. I think less than 50 ended up getting a payout. And most of that 50 got very little, and one or two got an awful lot. So even within the sort of so-called democratized world of Lockbit, where Koroshev made it so easy for anyone to become a Lockbit affiliate, you still had the situation where the old guard, like Evil Corp, so Maxim Jakobits and crew, were making huge amounts of money with Lockbit, and other people were just not. And my worry is enabling the sort of machine or engine of the people like Jakobits more than it is kind of lone wolf type people. But then I don't know, maybe I'm skewed on that just from law enforcement discussions. You know, it's a bad guy they want to get at.
So in cybersecurity, what skills is Gen AI replacing, and what skills do you think will become more important in the industry?
Critical thinking will become much more important. The ability to challenge what you see. You have to, every time you take something from Gen AI where you are asking it to mine for data as opposed to translate, you have to ask yourself, is this hallucinating? So, you know, in some ways, this is the stuff of a traditional university education where you're not being taught a particular technical skill. What you're being asked is, can you assess what's in front of you? Can you assess the reliability of it? Can you make sense of it? Can you draw a conclusion or pose a hypothesis and draw a conclusion? And then can you express some degree of trust in your assessment or your conclusion? So I think that's going to be the challenge. We're going to have lots and lots of people who are going to blindly accept the outputs and assume that it is some kind of panacea. And some of those people will be very successful. But then there'll be a surprise. So it's like, you know, it's an extreme value theory type distribution where suddenly a mistake will come up and things will collapse. And others will be more conservative. And, you know, there's a line there where if you're too conservative, you're not going to gain the advantage of AI. If you're overly pushy on it, then you could end up with some low probability end up creating problems for yourself. So I do think just that professional curiosity and the willingness to challenge and make sense. I remember my first lecture at Heriot Watt in Actual Maths and Stats in 1986. A lecturer came in, Roger Gray, and he said, before you apply any of these tests, whether it's a mean, the standard deviation, a t-test, and analysis of variance, whatever, the list is endless. Just look at the shape of your data and ask yourself, does it make sense to apply these tests? You know, and yeah, and you know, we've all seen these things where you draw a line through data and you go, well, that's the gradient of the line, and yeah, if you look at the residuals and they're like, you know, negative, negative, positive, positive, negative, negative, and actually it's a hyperbolic curve through, and yet you still manage to fit a y equals mx to c to it, but you didn't look at your data. So I think it's that kind of mentality that we're going to need to breed in new entrants into the workplace, an ability to have a confidence in data and things that they're looking at, and a confidence to challenge the things that have been presented to them.
Yeah, yeah. I've pulled up several students we were using standard deviation to say that you don't have a normal distribution here. Your data is all over the place. So how can you actually say that this has a standard deviation? So
Yeah.
I think that the core principles are really important. The formality is going to become more important. I think the levels of expertise and knowledge will go up one level. So the SOC one level ones become the SOC level twos and so on.
That's right.
And obviously we'll have to make sure that we have a training program almost, because if they're not going to be level one SOC analysts anymore, then we need to bring them up to speed to be the level twos.
And there's a key thing here as well, which is if you understand the system well, you 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 just mustn't just leap for AI as the tool.
Yeah,
So it's been a watchword of my team for nearly a decade that we automate the mundane.
yeah,
And if if you can automate the mundane in a deterministic way, why bother with AI?
yeah,
It would maybe help you get there. So stuff like our botnet emulation and things like that, we could ask AI to have a stab at it, but it would not be as good as having, the thing built by a malware analyst with 15 years of experience, knowing that there's a deterministic outcome here, so he doesn't need to go into the sort of stochastic world for it. Well, that's probably a terrible use of language, but you know what I mean. Yeah,
yeah. And so obviously there's the rise of AI agents. So that's a scary thought that you would
that
have
is.
agents that could transverse. They've been around for a while, agent-based systems, and I remember I used to work in mobile agents that could hop around, but they had one task, one goal that they had. So do you think that Gen AI and this rise of uh, uh, bots, automated bots, will be good for threat intelligence? Are there any applications of it?
I don't know if it will be. I mean, there could be, and we are, if we're retro hunting for something specific, say a government partner has given us something and says, let's go looking for it, we'll often turn up an awful lot of logs. As you know, formats are different. As you very well know, depending on how you implement ACLs on a system, the sense of the logs can, did you implement that ACL inbound on the outer interface or outbound on the, I mean, what a shambles. So we are looking at little AI bots to help us analyze things like that, just to get more efficiency in the retro hunts. I think my fear on agentic AI, which was triggered by a tremendous world-class security professional, a guy called Bob McCardle, who works at Trend Micro. And I saw Bob is in the industry group at the National Crime Agency with me, and he gave an excellent presentation a few months ago talking about the fear of, well, not fear's the wrong word, that's not the way Bob speaks, but agentic AI. And it was the use case I mentioned earlier of what happens if the bad guys use agentic AI to suddenly farm all the stolen data, which previously was discarded. So I think that there is a worry there for the large scale e-crime gangs, as well as a positive side on defence.
And what areas of Gen AI do you think are not so good in cybersecurity?
Yeah, I mean, I've touched on it. I think it is just the belief that it is an all-seeing eye. Well, guess what? If it's brand new tradecraft you've never seen before, how's it going to know about it? So uh, I do worry when people use it, like I say, as a queryable database. The hallucinations can get extreme. So I think the examples that people use often they're not generic, but they're very, very mainstream. And then as you get closer to the cutting edge of stuff, you are by definition going to get a more generic answer unless it's been specifically well trained. And if it's something new and emerging, then it might be lucky. But so I think it's the worry there is blind faith in the systems.
And obviously with AI, that there is a concentration of the knowledge and obviously the data centers within just a few companies. And
Mhm.
it's also happening with cybersecurity. Do you see the future as a cybersecurity world that is just dominated by just these very few privileged? You work for a very large company just now. Do you think these large companies are going to dominate, almost create a monopolistic uh, approach to cybersecurity, or do you think that there is still opportunities for young, small companies to grow?
There's always opportunities for young, small companies to grow, and you've done several. ZoneFox is a great example. Uh, but so in any mature consolidated marketplace, you have two or three principal players, and the rest is shrapnel. That's just a law of economics, rule of three, or something they call it. But I think at one level, the kind of it's not a monoculture, but I don't know what the right word is to use. If we look at the dominance of Microsoft and Amazon as an example, if you're an expert at understanding Office 365 and Azure permissions, and the fact that almost everyone is using Office 365, and you can find a vulnerability or a neat wee trick to get in there, uh, then that monoculture is not very healthy. On the flip side, I know that Microsoft works super hard to protect their customers. So having all the eggs in that basket with a very well scaled, well informed, huge visibility security team protecting that's a good thing. But so there is a resilience worry in terms of both AWS and Microsoft. And then in the security industry, I guess it's less so because even the largest security companies are still relatively small, Google Mandiant accepted. And then on the AI side, yes, we have a lot of power in the hands of not very many organizations that everyone is depending upon. They're not a heavily regulated industry. And it's clear from talking to people in governments in various countries that their principal risk from AI that they're looking at is that old triad of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Like, how can we make sure that these services are available, that the answers they give are given with integrity, and that the queries that people make of them are confidential? So I'm confident that certainly in the governments I speak to, that they are understanding that there's an issue there, that the people that are running these platforms need support and help and guidance to make sure that, like I say, they're available, the integrity of the answers is good, and the queries that people are making of them is confidential.
Yeah, I suppose it's a thing we've had in security for a while, that open source software tends to be free of bugs and so on, so everybody can actually see it. Closed source software, we've had lots of problems. So perhaps there's a model that we could move more towards open source models, such as the Llama, Meta's Llama model in there. But it's going to take a while for that to settle down. But you're right. I mean, we are very dependent upon pinpoint centralized sources of AI, centralized sources of truth.
Yeah.
And also there's this AI learning from AI, where it actually gets worse. If you actually
Yes.
create content from machine learning, then there's no human input into there. But yeah, we'll see how things are changing. And obviously, one of the big things that's going to change in cybersecurity. So, cybersecurity, the foundation of it was built in the 1970s with RSA and public key encryption and the Diffie-Hellman method. So, the two core things, key exchange
Mm-hmm.
and key exchange, we can have the Eve in the middle, unfortunately. So we need this digital signature to sit on top, and we have a PKI. So just like in DNS, you created identity systems that were probably based on PKI. But it's at risk, of course, because quantum computers can break elliptic curve, RSA, and the other public key encryption methods. So what do you think I know it's a difficult thing to analyze, but
Saying that again.
do you see the migration towards post-quantum cryptography? Because NIST have said within 5 years it will be deprecated, and 10 years it will be gone. What does that migration look like for industry?
Yeah, it's a good question. So obviously, NIST have published the new standards. I'll be honest, I haven't seen what the hardware impact is of the implementations of those standards to understand whether what we're looking at here is a software upgrade for relatively modern systems or whether there's a complete hardware refresh required. I think the way that this is going to progress is we'll have big players going first. So the Googles, the Microsofts, potentially the telcos, and then maybe in an ideal world, the large banks, so that much in the way of, was it Busby with the phone day when we added the extra digit to the phones in the UK? You created a momentum in people's minds that this is a thing and it's definitely happening. So almost like, not quite creating a sort of fake Y2K type bubble thing. But I think that's what's going to be needed because there will be a long tail of people who have no clue what post-quantum crypto is. And we've seen that with even deprecation of different SSL standards where people haven't done stuff until people running browsers have said, we're not going to accept that anymore. So I think, again, there needs to be some big public information thing here. So, some migrations led by the big guys who know what they're doing, can demonstrate success, and then some kind of surge over a period of years to persuade all enterprises to migrate to full post-quantum crypto. Because a lot of people think this is a future problem. And I may get the name wrong here, but there's a very well-known tale, which was detailed in the Spycatcher books and in other books, where the UK had captured a significant amount of Russian radio traffic over a period of time in the late 50s. I think they called it Venona. And then they managed to crack the crypto that was used. But because they'd captured this historically, they were able to go back and decrypt all of that data with the future technology. So there are things now which we're exchanging right now, which if someone is capturing in 10 years or 15 years' time when post-quantum crypto is widely available, they could decrypt it. Now, most of what we are doing on the internet today is transactional, but some of it isn't. So there really needs to be some hard thinking. And there's an amusing side tale here. I'm sure Steph Dawson won't mind me saying this. Steph was an amazing lady who's one of our lead class consultants. And we had the contract to handle the electronic submissions for the first electronic Scottish census. And Rafe was working with Steph on this, and he said, oh, right, okay, let's, SCP this data over to the data center where it's going to live. And Steph was like, can't do that. We can't do that because the law says that a census needs to be confidential for 100 years. And I can't predict what cryptography is going to look like in 100 years' time. And we can't have the risk that someone captures that data in transit with, with our protections in whatever year it would have been 2011. So no, we're going to put this on tape and or CDs, and we're going to put it in a car and take it that way, which is, kind of interesting.
So in your work, I know it's very difficult. It's like asking what's your favorite child, but in all your areas that you've worked on, what thing is you're most proud of?
I don't know. I mean, I'm proud of the fact that Graham and others and myself identified identity as the really key thing a long time ago. I have a presentation I gave at Napier in 2010 where I talk about security being about session token theft, not other things like this. And of course, we're living in that world very much today.
That's true.
There's some incidents that we have worked which make me very proud. There's two where the possibility of people being physically hurt was a thing, which is a rare thing in our industry, but it was particularly nasty, hostile foreign state actor looking for location details of people who were vulnerable to access. Some of those things make you proud. I think the fact that we chanced upon all of these Bitly links being created by the Russians back in 2004, 2005, and were able to firstly observe the fact that fishes were getting sent into Hillary and the DNC. But secondly, with that data set of nearly 20,000 Bitly URLs, which translated to approximately 9,000 victims, demonstrate that the only threat actor in the world that would have been interested in that set of victims would have been the Russian GRU. And obviously Trump said it was a £400 man on his bed or something. But very, very hard to fake a data set of 9,000 credible victims of GRU. There's been some other incidents involving some nuclear stuff. There's always really, really interesting incidents that give you a wee buzz. And even just, the team helped the RNLI when Nigel Farage said that the RNLI should not be rescuing drowning migrants from the sea. And we just jumped on that. We didn't charge the RNLI a penny. I had to stop people from getting in cars because what had happened at that time was a whole bunch of the fringes of Nigel Farage's followings decided to start DDoSing the RNLI website and things like this. So there are moments like that where you're just proud of the people that work for you because they're just doing the right thing without question.
That's great, yeah. And so you talked about token stealing just now. I've just finished lecturing to students all about the risks of tokens, of JWT and OAuth, the horrible OAuth standard that got worse between version 1 and version 2. So could you just quickly outline what token stealing is all about?
Yeah, well, I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, there's lots of very, very complicated protocols. As you highlighted, there's OAuth, there's other bits, there's more traditional SAML type stuff. But at the end of the day, a token is a little cryptographically signed thing generally that you're passing backwards and forwards to say you are who you say you are. Because obviously when you authenticate to a website, you are passing your password and that's establishing a session. And then depending on what infrastructure and what systems they use, the fact that you don't have to re-authenticate every time you do a page refresh is because you have some kind of session key or session token that is being shared. So that token may be bound to your hardware or may not. It may have a long or short expiry. And people generally don't think about that because it's a hidden transactional thing underneath the surface. And just one example of, scary is the wrong word, but so the SEC recently put out a thing saying, if you're floated on one of our stock markets and you have a significant cyber incident, then you have to report it. So Cloudflare had a security incident, was it last year or the year before? Anyway, they had one. And they put their filing in. And Okta, which is obviously, identity glue for the internet, a company that provides that sort of stuff, in there, it said that Okta had been compromised and that within their service desk, I'm paraphrasing this, I'm going to get the details wrong, but this is the rough sense of it. In their service desk, there was a HAR archive had been uploaded as part of a trouble ticket with Cloudflare. And in that HAR archive, they found a session token. And the bad guys used the session token found in a HAR archive in a service desk ticket in Okta to replay against Cloudflare to get into Cloudflare. Yeah. That's either lucky but until that point, how many of us were actually saying, check what the time to live is on your tokens? Because that token clearly didn't have a time to live of, an hour. It clearly had a much longer. I don't know how long the TTL was, but yes. So understanding these tokens, understanding what the conditional access policies are, and whether they are actually tied to your machine or not. These are not some things that the everyday person needs to know or understand, but those in the position of privilege who are implementing systems should be asking for either understanding that or asking for transparency from their service providers on exactly what is the TTL on this session token here. And it's difficult to get a feel for that yourself, because if you have really good conditional access policies, you'll rarely be challenged for a password by your identity system because it's handling it in the background. And it's like having a bank where you're about to do something anomalous, buy a car or something, like, I know I'm going to get a phone call from the bank validating this. And you don't get a phone call from the bank all the rest of the time because their systems are good at identifying anomalous activity. So for your day-to-day authentication onto your desktop, you would hope that the conditional access policies are tuned to normal behavior and will only kick in looking for a second or additional factor of auth if something significant changes. That sort of concept needs to be extended. And it's a murky world where only a small number of admins really know what's going on there.
Yeah, I mean, they just need one touch point. An adversary needs one touch point, one login. It's not an admin account; it's a low-level account,
Right.
and then they can move laterally across. And I think the worry is that something like OAuth 2, you have a client ID and a client password. How silly is that? So everybody knows the password. Ex-employees know it. Not many companies will change their client password for OAuth 2 when someone leaves the company. It's the same thing when you have a Windows domain, that you're meant to actually change all the passwords when someone moves out from the IS department. And then there's the debate about HMAC signing against public key. Many companies will just go for this HMAC where we have this shared symmetric key. Someone finds it, they can sign a token, and public key is much better, but few people understand how that whole thing works with public key encryption. So we learned a lot from you. So we modified our courses to have more networking protocols, command line, and intrusion detection systems, especially just by speaking to you. So what would you say are the skills that a cybersecurity graduate really needs to focus on these days?
Yeah, again, it goes back to stuff we've discussed, but I think I started off running computers in a university department where anything with a 13 amp plug in it was my problem. Phone systems, you name it. And, I've got a guy working for me who started off life working in a university as a computer officer down in Southampton, and many others. Having a broad understanding of IT, I think, is really, really helpful to place stuff in context. And I don't often say kind of nice stuff about the CISP thing, but that is a good thing. Going back to things like backups, the concept of maximum permissible downtime for an overall system, right? That's a concept that people have to have in their heads. So I think a broad understanding is important. We've talked about critical thinking. And then I think these days, an appreciation for the complex mashups and the extended enterprise that we have, where the dependency tree is something rotten. And that dependency tree manifests itself in multiple dimensions. You've got a dependency tree for SaaS services. You've got software bill of materials, where you've got a dependency tree for open source libraries. Who even knew if this library that has been compromised is in this node software package, like 3 hierarchies all the way further down. And you'll notice I'm not saying we need malware analysts or cryptographic experts. Probably, you're probably not happy with me with that, Bill, but I guess if you can think on your feet and you have a good technical background, I guess it's like writing code. The first language I wrote code in was BASIC. I then did Pascal at university, was forced to do a bit of Fortran, and then ended up writing C. And I think if you've ever written code in a language like C, where you have to handle the memory handling yourself and things like this, you can write code in anything because you understand code control blocks and memory management and everything else. And who would have predicted that Golang and Python would be the things that we would be caring about today 15 years ago? I'd be like, hey, Perl is good enough for me. So I think you need to have people who can show that they can acquire the technical skills as they evolve. And I think that probably means that you have to have demonstrated a baseline in something like programming or something like networking, something like cryptography, or the mathematical competence of some form of applied maths. But I don't think I would ever be in a position of mandating a particular technical skill, more the proof that you could acquire that competency.
Yeah, yeah. No, I completely agree. I mean, it's such a complex area. I think there are 54 different jobs in cybersecurity, going from the softer end, the more business focused, to the hard technical end. And there's a spectrum in there, of course. And obviously, it always comes down to business, understanding business and what the problems of customers actually are. And the soft skills are just as important as the hard skills, working in a group, being empathetic and things like that. And so, what does the next decade look like for cybersecurity?
I guess in 10 years' time, I'll still be complaining that people aren't patching stuff that's facing the internet. IPv6, we're seeing threat actors making use of IPv6. I mean, I'm sure they've been making use of it for longer than we've been observing it, but it's kind of the thing that nobody wants to get involved in because it just looks a bit more complicated
Yeah, it
than
does.
IPv4.
You don't know where to start.
That's right. I think boundaries of enterprises will continue to get fuzzier. Um, uh, yeah, it's really, really hard to say. But I do think my prediction thoroughly is that in 10 years' time, we'll still be urging people to patch stuff that faces the internet and fully implement multi-factor auth.
Yeah. And do you have any regrets in your career? Is there something, some decision you've made that didn't quite turn out right?
Not really. I've never had a plan. I think you know that. I've
Yeah.
just kind of stumbled around and done the stuff that I've enjoyed. So I don't think so. I maybe sometimes thought maybe I should have had a plan. Maybe I should have been more political. But in my entire career, I've just literally done what I thought was right to the best of my ability, and I can't think of anything where I'm looking back going, nah, I shouldn't have done that. So yes,
And And places are important. I mean, an ecosystem is created. Edinburgh is founded on finance. It's
yeah.
such a strong driver for the economy. Aberdeen, oil and gas, and so on. And I've seen the ecosystem in cybersecurity change from being not an industry. We can't really say that this is any industry. Why would anybody want to get a job in it or even invest in it, to be such a critical part of our economic infrastructure? What is it about the cities in Scotland, or Scotland as a place, that makes it successful? I mean, obviously compared to London or some of the big cities in the world, it just doesn't have that economic power. But what is it about Scotland that's made cybersecurity so successful?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's a small enough but big enough thing. I think we've heard that argument many times for Scotland. I also think that the quality of education in Scotland will stop. The mix of universities we've got, depending on the sort of thing you prefer, how applied you want to be, how theoretical. You've got, you've got Napier, Abertay, Herrick-Watt, Strathclyde, Edinburgh, Glasgow, and obviously there are many others if we look out with the central belt, Aberdeen, Dundee, St Andrews and Stirling. And apologies to anyone I didn't meet, but the mix of higher education institutions in Scotland creates a fantastic substrate of graduates at all different kind of leanings and dimensions of skills that mean that it's just a good place for people to locate staff in software development, and in cybersecurity. So, I think the raw material is there, and I think there's enough momentum in the industry there. I mean, DNS in some ways was a self-fulfilling prophecy for Scottish enterprise. They were our largest customer at the point of acquisition, and of course they were trying to promote Scottish enterprise, and we became a significant success story. But you've now got others. There's loads. There's the companies that you've fostered. There's the Vactas and Quorum Cybers of this world, all very credible organizations, all serving their customers very well, as well as good old SecureWorks DNS, still kicking around, sometimes forgetting they're in Scotland because they're dealing with stuff all over the world. But yeah, I think it's a good substrate, and like you say, there's sufficient momentum in the industry that you can have a successful career in Scotland, and you don't need to go anywhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. And my last question is, if you weren't a cybersecurity professional, what would you have liked to have been?
It's a really hard one to answer, but I did give this one some thought, and I think I would have liked to be a structural engineer. I
Yeah,
know that's a weird one,
yeah,
but I used to say an architect, but
yeah,
I then realized that the architects don't ever work out if the building's going to fall down or not,
yeah,
or the bridge is going to fall down. So, and I know there's a couple of people that have worked for me in the past, if they ever watch this video, who have been structural engineers, and they'll be like, Don, you don't know what you're
yeah,
talking about. But anyway, there you
yeah,
go.
yeah. That's great. Well, it's been a real privilege to speak to you and really keep up the great work that you're doing. I think I've seen your career evolve over the years, and you've always been an inspiration to lots of people, especially students and graduates. So thank you so much, and enjoy
My,
the rest of your
my
threat
pleasure, Don.
intelligence day. Thank you. Bye bye.
Okay, take care. Bye bye.